Okay. It looks like most people on the attendees are through now, so we'll make a start. Thank you, everyone. First of all, audience, for your attendance. It's really good to see some familiar names on the list there, and thank you to the panel as well for joining today, Leila, Peter, and Ian. So welcome to the Institute of Water, Black Voices in the Water Industry webinar. I just wanted to start by again saying thank you to everyone who's joined today, and to our regular attendees to these webinars as well, who have followed us through the Black Voices webinar since 2020 when we first started. As we mentioned in a previous webinar, by attending these sessions, you're really showcasing your allyship towards equality and supporting the growing platform voices of those from the Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities have in this industry. So thank you for being allies, and thank you for following our journey. So last year, if you were with us in our last webinar in August time, we heard from Southern and Anglian Water CEOs, so Peter Simpson, who we have on the call, and Ian McAulay. They went through their D&I strategies for 2021 and gave us a really open and honest view of where their organisations were and what they planned to do to raise awareness of and combat racism for underrepresented groups in the industry, so within the workplace and also the wider community. So today, Ian and Peter are joining us to give us an update on their progress, that they set their 2022 goals last year. So we'll hear from them about how they're getting on, any interesting initiatives that they've participated in. And we're also welcoming a new panel member, Leila Thompson, from British Water. So Leila will also be giving us an overview about the initiatives that are going on at British Water, and then we will also have a personal experience discussion at the end. So agenda for today, then we will hear an intro from each of our speakers, Leila, Peter and Ian, who you can see on the video. We'll then have a recap from Peter and Ian on their diversity and inclusion goals and progress that the respective organisations have made. A little bit different for Ian now, for those who are aware. We'll then hear from Leila, and we will then break for a quick celebrating diversity exercise, so all of the audience can join in. And then we'll finish off with a personal experience discussion between myself and Leila, and Rose will take over at the end to do the Q&A panel. So Rose, if you wanted to do a quick introduction on yourself, and then we can hand over to the rest of our panel for intros. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shanice. And yeah, just to kind of echo Shanice's sentiments, so thank you so much to all of our panelists for joining, and to our participants, and the biggest thank you to Shanice, who's done so brilliantly organizing this session, and the other ones as well. So yeah, huge kind of well done. So just to very briefly introduce myself, I know some of you on the call, exactly like Shanice said, great to see some familiar faces. My name's Rose Schisler. I work for Anglian Water as a program manager, and in my free time, I'm on the Institute of Water Board of Directors in the role of DE&I champion. So just making sure that everything we do as an institute is kind of celebrating diversity and ensuring inclusion for our members, and for people who join our webinars as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Rose. Leila, would you like to do a short introduction?
Yeah, so thank you. So yeah, my name is Leila Thompson and I'm the Chief Exec of British Water. I've spent most of my career in international trade. So I used to work for the Department for International Trade, helping companies to export to a wide range of countries, especially the Middle East. And then I brought that experience to the healthcare sector and then to the water industry when I was International Director at British Water. And then I got promoted to the role of Chief Exec of British Water just over 3.5 years ago. And I just want to add my thanks and say, Shanice, what you've done in creating Black Voices in Water has been absolutely fantastic. It's been pioneering as well. So well done for taking that forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Leila. Peter, hand over to you for a short introduction.
Yeah, thanks very much. So Pete Simpson, I'm privileged to be the Chief Exec of Anglian Water, and I'm really pleased to be supporting this event. I was a past president of the Institute of Water, so I think the Institute of Water is a fantastic organisation. I can't think of a better place to actually have some of these conversations, actually. So that's great, and it's nice to be invited back again. It's not often Ian and I get invited back to stuff, so it's always nice to be invited back. And I'm looking forward very much to sort of giving you some insight, some of the things we've done since we were last here together, and just underline what Lila's just said. Actually, well done you for keeping the profile up as well with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Ian, I hand over to you for the last intro.
Thanks, Shanice. Yeah, I had my thanks at the start as well. I think you've done an absolutely fantastic job, all of you, and Rose does that on the IOW as well. Agreed, fantastic organisation. I sit on the board of the IOW as well. For those that got the cryptic message there, I have very recently retired from full-time work, but stay connected to Southern, obviously, and really pleased they've continued on with the work that we started some time ago. So I'll show you some of the things, the progress there. I have also taken over as chair of a very relevant charity, Delalio Rugby Works, which is all about inclusion. And I think it has a real connectivity to the water industry. So I'll talk a little bit about that as we go through.
Thank you. Thanks, Ian. Okay, cool. So I'll ask Abby to share screen now to show us the presentation slides, and we'll do a little recap and reflections on last year. So when I think back to where we were last year, it was just kind of the start of the discussion with the wider industry. As far as Black voices in the water industry are concerned, Bavita, I can see you've joined the call in the audience, but there's a little timeline here. Bavita was our driving force for our first webinar back in August 2020. We then went on to do a further 4 webinars with the Institute of Water, and respectively the panel that were presenting for the Institute of Water. We were lucky enough to be able to use this platform. We were also asked to do another webinar with Gladstone's library, which was really impactful. So this Institute of Water platform has really given us a good kind of foundation, and really, really grateful for that. So you can see how far we've come since 2020, and we hope to carry on in future as well. So yes, moving on then, I will hand over to Peter to give us an update. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks very much. Well, I'll try and rattle through these reasonably quickly. I mean, I suppose what I can say just before we kind of move on to the next slide is momentum has grown really since we were all together last time, and we had a bit of a discussion about, you know, all of the various things we can do as individuals and as companies to raise profile, and hopefully I'm going to give you some insight into that, and also kind of some of the more tangible impact that that's had as I go through. So I'll just flick onto the next slide. What you'll probably remember from those of you who were at the last webinar was I talked a bit about Lewis Hamilton and Formula One, and some of the interesting things that he was doing, and some of I mean, you will have gathered from that I'm a bit of an F1 fan, but I've been incredibly impressed by some of the positioning that he's taken, and also some of the real commitment he's shown, actually, particularly not just for the, I suppose, the really sort of sexy parts of Formula One, driving the cars, but actually more importantly, perhaps, for the build-up of the whole teams, how you get apprentices in Formula One, and his observation that, you know, frankly, there was nobody who looked like him in Formula One at any level, not just drivers, at any level. And he undertook to do an awful lot of work to try and shift that down. He's had some success, I have to say, particularly when you start looking at the team build-ups. Well, over the last year as a company, we've actually had his brother, Nick Hamilton, talking to us and talking to our inclusion community about his experience. And Nick is challenged because he's got cerebral palsy. And for those of you who know Nick, he drives in the British touring car championship. And he's kind of a para-Olympian, as he described it himself, competing in the Olympics. So there's no changes at all. He competes on exactly the same level in the same sort of equipment. And he brought to life, I suppose, the compound impact of being of a different colour to other people who are racing cars, but also having really big physical challenges. And he talked a lot about his life and how he's overcome some of the barriers that frankly just wouldn't be there for I suppose the likes of me if I'd ended up going and doing some of those things, and how tough it was to even get to the point of being able to get into a kart for him, and ultimately what it drove in him, which was a real mental strength, and he built a high level of resilience, really. And so really, really interesting story, but a different perspective. I mean, it just sort of reminded me that we sometimes think about these things in individual dimensions, and the reality is often these things can compound, and his was a very interesting story, very inspirational. We also had Dawn Morton Young talking to our inclusion community, very much there about thinking about management and leadership, and how do you get more, how do you target underrepresented managers, and how do you actually ensure that we shift the dial on some big statistics in the industry and across industry. Like, I think it's only about 37% of FTSE 100 companies have got, 37% of FTSE 100 companies are without ethnic minority leaders. She got some really interesting sort of stats and talked about what we need to do in that space, which was interesting. And then in the actual community itself, we've had some really just different perspectives coming in to kind of raise profile. So we've had a lady talking about women's hair and identity, black women's hair and identity, and the kind of how that's thought about, and how in organisations, and also even to looking at the history of the Notting Hill Carnival. We had somebody talking about that and linking back the sort of deep connection with that particular person's Caribbean culture, Caribbean roots, and what that meant, through to a fantastic session with African and Caribbean food being held at one of our sort of main centres. Again, just ways of getting different conversations going, I suppose, is the heart of it. But one of the most interesting ones for me was actually a session we had again online with the inclusion community from Shaka Hislop, and this is a football area, so I know nothing about football. If anybody know me, I know nothing about football, so forgive me for all of the sweeping generalizations I'm going to make. But Shaka started the whole Show Racism the Red Card initiative, which is now 25 years old, which I must admit I had no idea about, but 25 years old, and talked about actually an early incident which started to spark that. And essentially he was outside St James's Park, which I'm told is the place they play football if you're a Newcastle United fan, but means nothing to me. But he was at a petrol station and filling up his car with his wife in the passenger seat, and a group of youths came along and basically started shouting racial abuse at him and his wife, until they recognised that actually he was one of their key players. And then of course they wanted his autograph, and he obviously couldn't get out of there fast enough. But as he started building the story, he then talked about, one of the most impactful moments for him was when he was talking to his wife, and so he's listening to his wife talking to their son. I think he was about 12 years old, something like that. And she was saying to his son, look, you need to recognize, if you get pulled over, for example, by authorities, the police, whatever, you don't run off like lots of your mates will do. Don't put your hands in, don't have your hands in your pockets. You say yes sir, no sir, and it just never occurred to him that conversation was taking place, and actually really affected him. He said he went into that was really necessary, and it was those sort of things that I think stimulated him into saying, how can we use his profile, the game of football, to actually educate kids. And I think over the last 25 years, they've educated something like 850,000 children, which is, I think, about equivalent to his the population of his home country, which is Trinidad and Tobago. So again, that was really inspiring. And I mean, it certainly made me think, you know, with kids of my own, that, you know, I've never even thought about having conversations like that, and it would never occur to me to have conversations like that. So it sort of opened up the gap in my mind. The next slide, please. I think one of the I remember having a conversation, I think, with Ian when we in the session last year. We talked a bit about reverse mentoring. I think Ian was talking about some of the interesting stuff they were doing in Southern at the time, and it's something we definitely embraced in Anglian, and we've put together a sort of formal scheme where we're going to use the inclusion community to actually do the reverse mentoring, particularly the management board. And whilst I don't think, and one of the commitments I made at the end of the last session is that I would do some of that myself, and I have had a number of conversations now, and I think they're conversations actually, to try and improve my understanding of the sorts of challenges that many people in our business face, and thanks particularly to Carl, who's shown on this slide here, for some of his insight. And I won't go through all of that, but just to pull out a few things that really struck me, which have kind of moved me forwards in terms of my thinking. One of the things that became really clear was, you know, particularly when Carl said to me, there are an awful lot of people in my community who wouldn't consider working for this organisation because of how you're presented, you know, and it was a real shock actually, because again, in my world, in my mind, I can't imagine why anybody wouldn't want to join this organisation I'm part of, because I'm very, very proud of it. I think it's a great company. I enjoy working here. Most people I know enjoy working here. So when that was said, when Carl said that, and I know he won't mind me saying it, it made me really think quite deeply about, well, why is that? And it was basically about, you know, can't see enough people in this organisation who look and feel like we do, and we continually, inadvertently, quite a lot of the time, present ourselves in a particular way, and it's Pete Simpson with his tie on presenting to you, and that's the organisation. Of course, it isn't the organisation actually. So there's a lot more to do on reverse mentoring, but I think we've got some good bits going off there. So next slide, please. So what does it mean? What does inclusion mean to us at Anglian? I suppose the thing I draw out here is when we look at the values of the organisation in the bottom left-hand corner of that slide, we say together we build trust, do the right thing, are always exploring, and together is a crucial piece, but also doing the right thing. Doing the right thing, in my mind, is about being an inclusive organisation. It is about recognising the strength of a diverse organisation. It is about recognising difference and embracing difference in the organisation and seeing that as very clearly the right thing to do, but also it makes very, very strong and good business sense. Business in the community, they done a lot of work in this particular space, and they repeatedly say that, you know, actually there's an opportunity here. If we could achieve race equality in the UK, they reckon there's £24 billion per year of opportunity to boost the UK economy. Well, I mentioned that because I think the Chancellor's desperately trying to work out ways to fill the rather large 50 or 60 billion pound gap. Well, maybe there's some of that, some opportunities perhaps in there. So I suppose the other thing is to say that, you know, on the right hand side there, I talked about this sort of layering of multiple different dimensions. The way we think about Anglian is we've got board champions. So each member of the management board champions on each of the strategic areas of focus on the right-hand side of this slide. So health and ability is the actual one that I champion on. Of course, we all champion across all of them as a management board, but there's a particular focus taken on these by individual and ownership taken by individual board directors, which is great because that's just enabling us to make much faster progress in 7 key focus areas where we want to see more inclusion. Okay, next slide, please. So I think this is going to be, we get there. This is sort of a scorecard type slide, because I think that was sort of the question. Lots going on. We've introduced mandatory e-learning, which I think is a very interesting module in the business to, again, really not just ask people to come, but actually insist that people get engaged with the subject, which is good. A lot more collaboration with the inclusion community, which continues to grow. I think we're over 300 people as part of our inclusion community, and that's really helpful. They're across the whole company, which is, and again, a really helpful means of generating ideas, generating challenge as well into the business, and road testing ideas as well. So when we sit as a management team coming up with great ideas, they're often a very useful place to go and bounce those off and see what the perspectives are. We're going to, I think the government's moved away from this at the moment, but the sort of the idea of ethnic pay gap reporting, but irrespective of what the government is or isn't doing, we shall be reporting our first ever ethnic pay gap report later this year. We've done an awful lot to shift the dial on sort of understanding, I suppose, ethnicity within the workforce. And it sounds really kind of obvious starting point, but the reality was I think we only had about 33% or so of our employees identifying what their ethnicity was. That's up at 69%, and we're heading for a target of 72% by 2023. So I'm sure we'll get well past that. So I think that's good, because that's not only is it telling us what's really going on, but it probably tells us on the journey that people understand we're paying attention to this, and it's important, and actually there's no risk around any of this. So I think that's helpful. I think that's really helpful. And we've done a similar thing with just going through all of our recruitment processes and making sure that as people come into the organisation, giving them opportunities to state what their background is, but also as we go through the interview processes, we're really tightened up so we understand what's actually happening, so we can see, if we're seeing drop-offs at particular parts of the pipeline of people coming into the organisation. Are we doing things? And I'm sure we would never be doing this deliberately, but it's the inadvertent things that we're doing that are stopping people wanting to apply to us, or when they've applied to us deciding not to get to the next stage, or when they've got to the next stage not getting to the further stage. So we've really tightened that up and improved the data around that, which I think is a really good thing. A big focus on trying to improve our ethnic diversity, particularly with target areas. So we've done a lot in Peterborough and seen a big shift in being able to recruit more diversity into our organisation. And in fact, we're going to be widening that out and doing more in Milton Keynes and Bedford, and really pushing hard in those areas. And that's everything from going into schools and talking to school children at much younger ages, and showing them the nature of what it is like to be in an organisation like ours, and definitely not taking me there and doing that, because that'd be the least helpful thing to do, but taking people who work in our organisation, love it, and trying to, I suppose, address some of the things that Carl had highlighted to me in some of our discussions, and carry on with lots of conversations with other organisations who we're working with closely, like the Prince's Trust and Business in the Community, and lots of other points where we can get, I suppose, sense checks of what we're doing. And I suppose, we carry on. It's nothing in anything I've said should imply that we have finished the journey. We're on a journey, and it's one we continue to be committed to. And in my time in the whole of Anglian Water, I've been lucky enough to spend quite a lot of time overseas. I was in the US for quite a few years. I was in Central Europe for quite a few years, and Southeast Asia as well. And I take from some of those experiences just what can happen if you get this wrong. There were some very interesting attitudes, I think is the best way to describe it, in some of my experiences in Central Europe. And I had some equally interesting experiences in the US. And I don't want to end up as a country or as an organisation anywhere close to some of the negative sides I saw there. So I'll leave you with a line from the acclaimed Black American writer James Baldwin, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. And I think that's part of what we're trying to do here. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. I really enjoyed that. I've got a couple of questions, but I'll have to wait till the end like everyone else. So yeah, so I know Rose has put a little note in the chat, but if there are any questions throughout the webinar, please do write them in the chat. Rose will be making a note of these questions and we'll answer them at the end. So yes, thank you so much, Peter. I'll hand over now to Ian.
Can you hear me now? I'm struggling to get unmuted there. Yeah. So yeah, thanks, Peter. As always, it's always a mystery to me when people don't think that water companies are good companies, and particularly Anglian. Stuff that Peter does and all the team at Anglian are always leading the way, and it's clearly demonstrated a lot has happened since we last spoke. I'll take you through a little bit about what's been happening at Southern. I'm indebted to Lawrence Gosden, who's now taken over from me as CEO, and coming from within the business and someone who felt he belonged at Southern Water. That was a nice thing to be able to do. And also Sarah Pacelli, who's been leading a huge amount of this work since we started it just a few years ago. But really, we looked at progression towards belonging. We want people to feel that they belong at Southern, that they belong in the water industry. They're proud to be there. It feels like home. And for us then, that was making sure that, as well as talking about EDI, that voices were being heard. We were designing systems to make that happen and that people could feel connected, because in that way we would get the belonging to occur and make these conversations not mandatory as such, but actually just part of how we go about doing business and how we have conversations. So if we move to the next slide, please. So there was a real intent in the design to make sure that everything was understandable, actionable and deliverable, as distinct from measurable and looking at clearly just looking at metrics. So the vision was to say, let's just make sure that we choose to consciously recognise and value the differences that we have. I.e., we can look to see people and recognise they do things differently, they may look differently, they may speak differently, but let's bring everybody together and make sure that all of our people feel that they belong in the organisation. And when we did that our intent was always to be succeeding together, which is one of the core values of the organisation. So that was the ED&I vision that we laid out to people, which is easy to quote back and people can feel that they can connect to that. So if we look at some of the things that have been done in the next slides, I won't go through this in much detail, but really 5-year plan. But that 5-year plan being round about those key tenets that I said of being deliverable, actionable, understandable. So effectively, if you go from the bottom, the baseline was really starting with the data and the reporting, the boring end. But if you haven't measured it, you can't take action on what truly matters. But the measurement wasn't just to put the metrics in place. It was so what actions do we need to take to make sure that those metrics will change? So you can see things like starting with the baseline audits, using the Gallup belonging. I spoke about Gallup last time. It's a global employee engagement survey. It measures belonging, it measures inclusion. So taking the baseline score there, and then looking at actions like increasing female and ethnic minorities. Some of you may remember, we got some really good insights at Southern from Edward Vera de la Cruz, one of our lawyers, who gave us some good insights as to why we had very limited, particularly Black voices in our organisation, and the barriers that there were to people coming in, i.e. we're looking at other types of organisations. So we have looked to say, well, one of the ways of attracting people in is that they will hear it from others. So it wasn't full focus on Black voices. It was wider and broader. There was a lot, particularly where we are. I live in Brighton, so the LGBT plus community was an area that we really wanted to do more with as well. So we did target improvements. We also looked at being measured by others, because that was really important to us. We can't just say that we're good at it. So things like the inclusive top 50 UK employers was a target, and I'll tell you some of the results there. And then you can see that we move on for the next 3 years. Then understanding and awareness. So if you have the measurements and you can show people this is what we are measuring, it's the why of it. Why are we measuring that way? Are you aware of the things that we need to be doing? So the employee resource groups were set up, some of the base governance was put in place, we reviewed HR policies, we looked for the gaps, and then we looked for the action that can be taken to fill those gaps. So things like menopause awareness, for example. And that's translated now into training, but training not so that you can say, I've completed the module, training that says and encourages that this is what I've done in relation to this module, and this is what I'm going to do, so that the action was taking place. Then recruitment, obviously, a big focus. So simple things like blind CV trialing, which was not something I'd seen before, but an automated blind CV process to make sure that we weren't getting any conscious or unconscious bias coming through. Making sure that we had a value proposition for all employees, making sure that those that were doing the hiring weren't hiring in their own image, which I think we've all been guilty of through our careers, and making sure that we were looking at those gaps and trying to deal with them in a variety of ways, and at all levels in the organisation. So from apprenticeship level up, the Kickstart programmes, those things, and making sure that when they came into the organisation, we knew that they would be heard, that they could speak, that they would have the opportunity to speak, but it would also be heard as well. And then lastly, the overall communications. So similar to Peter, bringing people in who have suffered through their life some discrimination or exclusion. So we've had people like Gareth Thomas, Welsh rugby player. We've had some local celebrities, comedians coming in to talk to us about the exclusion that they experienced as well. And then we've made sure that our internal communications and external communications were tying up to the actions and the changes, and making sure that the external world could see that this was a place that was changing to be more inclusive, and that people who came here would feel that they would belong. If I've moved to the next slide, just perhaps to give you some numbers that demonstrate some of those things. So a further 5 employee resource groups set up. You can see them there: Women's Network, Parents, neurodiversity. We've now got ethnicity in place as well, and religious beliefs. But the real things that we see, the position in the inclusive top 50 improved again this year, which was quite a pleasing measure for us. Early career roles really starting to take off. So high female proportions in the apprenticeships and graduates as well. The real pleasing one for me was the one in the middle, that 93% of people said that they felt comfortable being themselves. I felt that really was one of the best measures that we had in place, because that means that people felt they could speak openly. Sure, 7% of people said that they didn't feel comfortable. That gives us some real information to work on. But you've got this big percentage of people who say, right, if I'm comfortable, I can now start to do more. So as we looked at doing more, we could increase the training, EDI and awareness training, and the action planning that came from that as well. And then the last bit, the dare to dream. So looking at social mobility, making sure that we were providing mentoring and reverse mentoring that Peter mentioned as well, appropriate job skills, planning for a different world, because the skills base needs to change as well. And then also looking at partnerships. And I'll flip over briefly now to looking at how we partner with charities, and the one that I've now taken over as chair, which is Delalio Rugby Works. And it has gives us some real insight into the ability to connect into the water industry and why people don't connect. So if we move to the next slide with that. Rugby Works it's really quite special for me in that it deals entirely with excluded people. So its whole aim is to take excluded young people across all different areas and help them to help themselves to build a positive and productive future. And it really is, the stats that I discovered in there when the team were telling me about that, these are young people who, through no fault of their own, have been excluded from mainline education. So they're put into special units. Sometimes that's just porta cabins at the bottom of a playground, but they are genuinely excluded from everyone else. And that isn't particularly helpful. So if you look at the alternative provision stat there, there's only half of the people who are in that excluded alternative provision approach that actually move into sustained education, employment and training after the age of 18. And that compares with 94% from people from mainstream schools. So that exclusion is really quite damaging. It also results in a lot of people ending up in the prison system, and 63% of prisoners have a history of school exclusion, which is quite remarkable. You can also see some of the Black Voices statistics there as well. 1 in 4 young people in serious youth violence are Black. 1 in 3 likely offenders are Black Caribbean boys, 4 times more likely to be excluded in some local authorities, sometimes as high as 6. So Rugby Works actually uses sport, which is something, I know Peter likes rugby better than football, so I've always embraced sport as something that has discipline, that has esteem building, it can help you to think differently, face pressure. So Dalalio Rugby Works uses rugby in active sessions as an engagement tool to help people to come in and feel non-threatened and included. So it helps them to build adult relationships with the trainers, and the participants are helped with life skills. So things like just simple stuff, CV writing, interview practice, and then going into career taster days as well, taking these people from the programme, once their confidence is improved, once their skills have improved, and allowing them to go into a lot of organisations to say, this is something I can do. And we have found there, as I've gone into it, that the water industry was almost unheard of across the whole Dalalio Rugby Works programme. So there's a big opportunity there to plug some of that skills gap, the employment numbers gap, and the diversity gap as well. So if we move to the next slide, please. This programme is operating across the whole of England and Wales, looking to expand it in volume and inclusion. There's more than that now, nearly 700 young people taken through it in 6 different regions across the UK. So you can see that goes across the APs, the Special Education Needs Schools, which is what SEN is, and Youth Offender Institutes, but also 53% being done in mainstream schools where exclusion was there. Only 32% came from the BAME, and you can see the figures there that in London, it's almost half of the cohort taken through come from that group, but it falls off quite dramatically elsewhere. And this is a real focus for us to try to bring more people from that group into the programme as well. So if I move to what should now I think be the last slide, and really important to me in terms of why is inclusion really significant? Well, it has a lasting impact, and I have seen no better evidence of it than in Rugby Works. So these are some of the stats that come out, that when you actively include people and give them support, and it's their progress that you're measuring rather than the entity's progress, you get some really pleasing stats there. So 100% of schools pleased with the programme. 81% of the candidates seeing improvements in their ability to work with others. 87% saying that they're able to think more clearly in challenging situations and to solve complex problems. And 79%, almost 80%, now understanding more about the employment world, being more ready to go into it, and understanding more career opportunities. So for me, now as I look to this in terms of where do we go, Southern absolutely committed to driving that programme forward at pace, and actually working a little bit with Rugby Works now to do the taster days. But I think there's a huge opportunity now to bring these two things together across the water industry, to start to bring more of that inclusion in and hopefully build the diversity that we're looking for. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Ian. That was a really nice summary. It's so good to see, Peter and Ian, that the progress that Anglian and Southern Water have made since last year. I think both organisations have come on leaps and bounds, and some of the initiatives are really, really innovative, particularly Ian, you talked about hiring in your own image. I'm sure we'll get to talk a little bit more towards the end of the session, but there's certain things that you brought up that actually I think throughout the webinars that we've had so far have been pretty uncomfortable things to talk about. But Peter and Ian, you've really kind of exceeded my expectations, and I think those uncomfortable conversations have definitely happened, and it's really clear to see that those have happened by the figures that you've shown us and the initiatives that you've both organisations have been involved in. So thank you so much for that. It was really, really good. Right, so now a different perspective. So Leela, I'll hand over to you. I think we might have had some audio issues, so let's just make sure we can hear you properly.
Thank you, Shanice. Can you hear me?
It's quite quiet.
Oh, really? Okay, just 1 second. Let me set this down. Bear with me. Oh, my volume is maximum.
Okay. Rose, what's it like for you? Sorry.
So I can hear you, Lila, but it is quite faint.
Really? That's not good. Am I still really, really faint?
That was better just then for me.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Agree.
if I speak loudly like this, will this help?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's the best we're going to get, I think.
Oh, sorry. I hope you can hear
No,
me. I mean, I hope you'll be able to hear me.
that was better, yeah.
Is that better? Okay, well, hopefully I'll speak as loud as I can. And then just let me know if you can't hear me, if I start to drift off, okay?
Okay, thank you, Leela. I'll hand over to you now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Shanice asked me a very challenging question. So what's British Water's role in all of this? And how does British Water fit into this context? And how can British Water influence these D&I strategies going forward? So it's been great to listen to Peter and also to Ian to find out what their companies are doing. So I just want to share it from British Water's perspective. So British Water represents the interests of water and wastewater supply chain companies. So we're a membership organisation with consultants, contractors, manufacturers and suppliers, all in membership, as well as academic institutions. And along with stakeholders, we provide support to supply chain companies through 3 of our informing and networking forums. So we have the UK, technical and international forum. And we connect companies to contacts to raise their profile, grow their businesses, and we promote best practice in the industry. Our 4th forum, the Water Industry Forum, with whom we merged on the 1st of April this year, provides challenge-led independent thought leadership to tackle the challenges that the sector is facing. And we know that there are many. So we also have water companies and other stakeholders in membership with whom we are exploring solutions to tackle some of the sector's pressing issues. So we have generated and been part of the conversation to help raise awareness of the experiences of Black and minority ethnic staff and other underrepresented groups. And we've also helped to come up with solutions. So for example, we launched a Women on Water campaign in 2018 when there weren't that many initiatives supporting women in the water industry. And we've noticed that our events and our campaign has spearheaded lots of women in water events and initiatives across loads of companies in the sector. And that's been really, really encouraging to see. We also, as part of the Women in Water campaign, made a commitment to increase the proportion of women on our board and in our workforce. And we still have more to do in that area. In 2020, we offered an opportunity for women to be mentored through the high-profile 30% Club, as we saw that not everyone had access to this program. Usually when companies have this program, people have to be nominated by somebody in HR, one of their bosses. But what we did through Xylem is we opened it out to anybody. So anybody could apply to be mentored through the 30% program or to become a mentor. And then over the last 2 years, we've opened it up through Mission Include so that people from underrepresented groups, including Black people, can also apply to be mentored. And that's been running for 2 years and has been very successful. We also recently partnered with the Women's Utilities Network And that really is to help us to kind of build our networks, to help women to get into the industry from whatever background you're from, to access opportunities. And importantly, British Water has also had to demonstrate that we have a diverse team. So if you look at our website, I'm really proud that we have a diverse team. We've got an apprentice on board, and we want to do more in that area. So British Water has a pivotal role to play in helping people see what is possible, to encourage everyone across the sector to have a more diverse workforce and to have more BAME people represented in senior leadership roles and speaking at events. Can you still hear me? Cool. So as a person of colour, I also think it's important for me to share my stories too, so people understand some of the challenges that we face. So it's important to listen, as the previous speakers have already said, and to capture the stories of lived experiences as well as the data. So we're already on slide 3. So one of the important things I wanted to point out was, so go back to the previous slide. So there are a variety of pathways that people can take, but they're not always open to everybody. So you can see that pathway. There are 3 at the moment, or 4, you can see them. But really, there should be one pathway, that there should be equality, that people have access to the same opportunities, and then they can decide to veer off or pursue different opportunities. And I think this is one of the key things that I really wanted to focus on. So, for example, I listen to many people from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds, and they tell me they want to give up on their careers, or they already have given up on their careers or left their companies because they don't feel that there's a place for them, that they feel battle weary, they're discouraged. And I think it's really terrible that we're losing out on all this experience and all this expertise across many sectors because people just don't feel there's a place for them. And I remember before I was promoted to chief exec, one of my close friends said to me, Lila, you've already reached your ceiling in your career as a director. You've got nowhere else to go. And I remember looking at her and thinking, goodness, this is terrible, if this is what she thinks. But thankfully I got promoted, and it helped her to see that it is possible. And it's really important that people can actually visibly see it's possible. And also I went to a young Black professionals networking event, 400 to 500 Black young professionals in a room. It was so inspiring. And during one of the refreshment breaks, I went up to a table to speak to a group of these young professionals. And I thought I was going to hear great stories of, I'm working for X, I'm working for Y, and I'm able to achieve this and that. But actually, the majority of those young people on the table said to me, we are leaving our jobs, or we have already left, because we're just fed up and we're tired and we're exhausted. And these were young people. And I was so upset to hear this, because I just thought, you've just started. And they said, we're not interested. And one of the key takeaway things I took was that we're not prepared to go through what your generation put up with. We are just not doing it. We're going to leave, we're going to start our own businesses. And I was so upset. If 20% of the water industry workforce is due to retire this decade, then what are we doing to try and keep the main people that we have? And what are we doing to try and encourage others and people from other underrepresented groups to join us in the water industry? We really have a lot of work to do. So what can we do? I think that we need to not be shy about targeting specific underrepresented groups when we're recruiting. So yesterday, I was really encouraged to hear as chief executive saying that they are specifically seeking to recruit somebody with a disability. That's what they're going to target, and they're going to work with a recruitment agency that specifically has disabled people on their books. And I think we have to not be shy, and we have to do that. I mean, there was a term also I heard yesterday called inclusive recruitment by Tony Cody yesterday, who many of you know. And I really like that term. We've got to be bold and we've got to be brave. Can I have slide 4, please? So I saw this phrase, and I just want to know if any of you feel like this. I was chasing my dreams, but I tripped over reality and busted my head on the truth. And the thing is, a lot of people feel this way. And if you feel this way, then what's the point? There's no point being part of the game. I mean, my dad used to say to me, Lila, you need to play the game. And I used to think, what is he talking about? And then as I got older, I realized what that meant, playing the game. And I remember saying to somebody years ago, they were saying, I'm not interested in the game. I just want to go to work and I want to come home. And I said, you know what? The game is being played, whether you're on the pitch or not. To get involved, sort yourself out and get on with playing the game, because there's always a game being played. And so I was encouraging this person, look, you have to be on the pitch. You've got to be noticed. You've got to, if you want your career to progress, you've got to take action. You can't just sit back. So I'm quite passionate about it. So some companies, and this is brilliant, are capturing data on a range of pay gaps for gender, ethnicity, etc. And this kind of data is not always easy to capture and then do something with. If you ask people to complete surveys, staff surveys, many people just won't complete them. I mean, we heard yesterday that only 30% of staff in one company completed the survey. And then some people purposefully complete the questions wrong. So for example, I have got a very close Black family member who, when she completes staff survey, she chooses white British. And that's because she's just completely frustrated with that we are still having these conversations about how to support people from underrepresented groups. And other BAME people may feel they don't want to participate in sessions such as this or meetings because they don't want to relive negative experiences or be seen as a troublemaker. So how do we capture data from these groups? How do we move forward? Can I have the next slide, please? So there's an old proverb, which I really do love, which says, hope deferred makes the heart sick, but desire fulfilled is a tree of life. So how do we get people to be able to bring their whole self to work? I mean, one person said to me really recently, not bringing your full self to work is exhausting. So how can we build effective, energized, diverse teams who are not going to feel exhausted navigating life? How do we get people to realize their hopes and dreams and live a full life as much as they can? I think we need to capture data, absolutely, but also take a holistic approach, capturing experiences and stories and including those from allies to increase people's understanding and awareness of racism and how it can be addressed. We need to drive change by getting on with initiatives we can take forward. We don't have to wait for the data. I used to say to people, look around you, just walk into a supermarket, look at the people who tend to be security guards and ask yourself, is this all that these people can achieve? Take notice of these people who are around you in your companies and support them and speak to them and ask them, can I support you? Can I help you to get to further your career? Because it's really not that complicated. So I see British Water's place as supporting, helping and pioneering and driving conversations to be part of the conversation, discussions and events such as this. And this topic, as I said, is obviously close to my heart as a woman of colour and working in the industry. It's really important that we have these sorts of platforms to generate open discussions about experiences and the progress made. And also just to narrow that gap so that there's one single pathway through that people can walk through so that there's equality of access. So that's me, Shanice.
Thank you, Leela. Really enjoyed that as well. I think when you touch on some of the issues and the barriers and challenges in this game that we play, yeah, it's interesting. I think from my point of view, you strike me. You're kind of a person that I've looked up to throughout my career from when I started back at Welsh Water as a graduate, and I think I first saw you speak at a young water professionals conference, and since then I've always kind of kept my eye on your career and how you've developed. And I think for me, I try to be this really strong person, overcome these barriers and really play the game, but not everybody's like that. So I think there's a need for this support system. There's a need for us to really make it an open support system that people can actively kind of really readily available support, resources, and guidance on how they can take action and overcome these barriers and the challenges that we have in the BAME community in this industry. Yes, so that was just one of my thoughts from your talk. But thank you so much, Peter, Ian, Leela. It was really interesting to hear from you about each of your respective organisations, and I think everyone in this audience will agree that Leela, you're in a really powerful position at the moment, and I'm really excited to see how your role as CEO at British Water will kind of shape the organisation and influence all the other the water companies and organisations that you work with, because I can see already changes happening, as Peter and Ian have mentioned, but we can really be leaders in this industry now, and I think that your role will be really prevalent in that, so thank you. Right, so we have now got a little exercise for everyone that might be fed up of being talked at, so we'll try and break it up a little bit, everyone. If you've got your mobile phone on you, you can scan the QR code that's appeared on the screen. There's a link there and a voting code as well if you can't scan the QR code. So you can navigate to menti.com and enter that voting code, or you can use the QR code. I will now share my screen so that you guys can see. What we're going to do is celebrate diversity with a word cloud. So this word cloud, I'd like everybody to please just enter their cultural dish of preference, or a cultural dish that they really enjoy. It doesn't have to be from your culture, it can be from any culture. I'm assuming that everyone on the call today is from the UK, so it'll be interesting to see your favourite dish and where it's from. You can enter up to three dishes on here, so hopefully we can see some of those coming through shortly. Jollof rice, love it. Plantain, yes. Haggis, really interesting one. I'm actually a vegan now. I never used to be, but worked in Glasgow for a long time, and yeah, had haggis, actually quite enjoyed it. See some really interesting dishes that come up there. Curry goat, one that I'm very familiar with. Really great to see all of these different ones. Lasagna, Italian dish, gumbo, yam porridge, tacos. And I think everyone will agree that this is just the key to my heart is food, right? So anyone cooks me any of these dishes, providing it's a vegan version, I'll be happy. But celebrating this is a real kind of interesting way to view celebrating diversity. And I think in the UK, we can all appreciate food, and we all appreciate, like, I'm in London at the moment and I can walk outside. I'm in Waterloo and there are about 50 different street vendors out on the river that are providing all of these different foods. So we're really lucky that we live in this kind of generation where we can share all of this, and it's really nice to see that everybody has participated as well. So thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing now. I'm going to take a quick screenshot before we move on to our next exercise. So bear with me 1 second. Right, so I've got a screenshot of our word cloud. So thank you everyone for that. And now we're going to move on to a little discussion between myself and Leela before we finish with questions and answers. So I think from my point of view, Leela, I really enjoyed your talk, and I think we've got so much to build on now. There's this one pathway that you talked about, I think is a very interesting way of looking at it, and I've never heard anybody talk about one pathway before, so it's a really new thing to me, but it's a great way of explaining it. I think when I look at myself and compare myself to my peers, my colleagues who I worked with, you're right, we've all had a completely different pathway, but I never quite aligned that to race. And in this industry, in water and utilities in particular, we do see a lot of people that have followed the one pathway. They've all come from a very similar background. They've all attended a similar kind of school or done similar extracurricular activities, which has then kind of shaped where they've ended up in their career. And unless you're able to take advantage of those opportunities, and if those opportunities come into your path, you're not able to kind of grasp those, take them the bull by the horns, and kind of get involved. And you see people that don't look like you in these industries, and you immediately think, well, maybe it's not the right place for me. Yeah, I just, what are your kind of builds on that? And obviously where you are now, as I've already said, it gets me excited for the rest of my career, because I see a lot of myself and different kinds of traits in you. Whereas when I look at the likes of Peter and Ian, I don't see that. So it's really, really good that we're now starting to kind of change that and get more colour and more minorities in our leadership within the industry.
Okay, that's another big question. Okay, so I think there are two key things I want to focus on. The first thing is opportunity. So the single pathway is really about opportunity. It's really about us knowing, Black and minority ethnic people and other underrepresented people, knowing that there are possibilities, that there are other pathways we can take, that we don't have to think, oh, don't even bother to think about X or Y, which is what sometimes I thought along my career. But I think for me, because I saw that other people were doing it, even if they didn't look like me, I thought, well, if they can get there, I can possibly get there. And I just want to pick up on your point that you made about strength, because strength is built. It's a bit like building a muscle. And I think I've been able to build my strength because I've had fantastic allies. I've always had an ally from when I was working, part-time in H. Samuels. I had a boss who was supportive of me, but then I had horrible colleagues, a couple of horrible colleagues who were just not very nice to me. But I've always had other people who have been really nice, who've been supportive and helped me. And that has then given me the confidence and the encouragement to keep going. And then with other jobs, I've had other people who have helped and supported me. And then it's that has then helped me to have that stepping stone to keep going, as well as the network of family and friends. I don't think I had coaches or mentors for a large part of my career. But what I did have is people who demonstrated to me that they believed in me, that they felt that I could go to the next step. Because nobody's born a chief executive. Nobody's born a senior leader. Somebody has to believe in you in order for you to get that opportunity. And I think that's the important thing. I think sometimes when people say things like, I don't believe in targets, Black people should have to be fantastic at the interview in order to get a particular role. And I challenge that and I say, look, hold on a minute. We all know lots of mediocre white people and people from other backgrounds in roles. They haven't had to be exceptional. So why does a Black person have to be exceptional to step into a particular role? That shouldn't be the case. It should be a level playing field for everybody, and it's not, unfortunately. And I think we have to watch the language that we're using. And I do challenge people when they're recruiting, and I say, look, you need to do things differently. If you don't do things differently, you're just going to get the same things. So looking at apprenticeships, looking at who you go to or what universities you approach for graduates. I mean, I have somebody close to me who told me confidentially that the chief exec only got interns predominantly from the university that they went to. So I said, so how on earth can anybody else enter this high profile company that they were working for? And they said, well, they can't. So these are the sorts of things we've got to challenge, the sorts of things that are pervading, not just in our industry, but in others, and speak out and challenge. And I do have the opportunity to be able to challenge, because I am aware that when you're lower down in your particular company, you can't be as vocal. And I definitely have experienced that. But I see part of my role is to be vocal where other people can't be vocal.
Yeah, no, it's you touch on a really important point there, Leela, having allies as well. And I think having those allies is part of building, it helps people build that confidence and build that strength when they know they've got people on their side. So I think we can see already on this call, Peter and Ian they're our allies. They've put all of these initiatives in place. One thing that you've all touched on, targeted recruitment. So as an industry standard, this isn't something that we report on necessarily. It's not something that we have in the past looked at as, okay, we're going to recruit 10 graduates this year and 20% of them have to be from a BAME background. It's not something that organisations have necessarily done in our industry. And I think from my point of view, targeted recruitment and making sure we do get as many people from different backgrounds, different ethnicities into the water industry at the beginning of their career it's not a bad thing. I don't think it's a negative thing at all. But yeah, I mean, what are your kind of thoughts around that, Leela?
Yeah, I mean, I know it's a difficult topic, and I know some people don't feel comfortable with targets.
Yeah.
I just say to people, look, unless we do something radically different, things will stay the same.
Yeah.
For example, I have specifically tried to make my team diverse. Definitely, because you have to. Otherwise, how can people really hear the opportunities? And when I was young growing up, I had no idea that I could build a career in international trade. There was nobody around me that was flying around the world helping companies to export, representing the UK government overseas, doing an overseas posting at a high commission or an embassy. I didn't know that opportunity existed. But the thing is, you kind of have to, as I said earlier, take a holistic approach and try different things and different mechanisms so people can understand the opportunity. One of the key things for me that I'm quite passionate about, it's not only telling people about the careers, it's telling people about the pay opportunities.
Yeah.
Because you can want a certain career, but you might not be able to afford to buy a home with that particular career. And it's important for young people to understand and know that if they want to have a certain lifestyle, then picking a particular kind of career might not necessarily get you down that pathway unless somebody can help you to put that finance in place. So I think it's just having those real discussions with people. And those are the sorts of things that I try to do. And for me, I believe in targets. Absolutely.
Yeah. No, and I think that's really clear from one of the stats that Ian brought up about women in the industry and how that percentage has just gone up really quickly because it was targeted. So we can see there's evidence that it works. It's just how do we kind of shape that in our recruitment strategies. You mentioned in your section about how sometimes by being more vocal and being kind of this strong, challenging person, you can be perceived as a troublemaker. I have often kind of had to bite my lip and take a step back because I don't want to be seen as a troublemaker and I don't want to ruffle any feathers. I'm still pretty junior in my career, so I don't always feel comfortable to ruffle those feathers, depending on who the audience is and what platform I'm using. Just this morning on my commute into work, I've been listening to Meghan Markle's Archetype podcast, and the one I listened to this morning was about the angry black woman. And women in general in powerful positions are often perceived to be dragons, often perceived to be really mean people. Oh, she's a really high up manager and she's just horrible, she doesn't like other women, and things like that. And I think as a black woman, sometimes it can be worse than just being a woman. So yeah, I mean, how have you tried to avoid that stereotype of being the angry black woman, but still been able to challenge and be a headstrong person in the industry?
I think it's hard because sometimes you want to say something. I mean, I've had lots of instances in my career where terrible things have been said. I mean, I remember being in an office once and there was a lady who was doing an internship and she said, you can hardly blame people for enslaving black people because black people just weren't bright at the time. And I just looked at her and I said, "Are you absolutely serious?" So I had to challenge her, but contain myself.
Yeah.
I just thought, how on earth have you got this kind of thinking? And
Mm.
I think you do. I mean, you can't. I mean, I have not, for largely parts of my career, been able to bring my full self to work. I've had to compartmentalize my life, and that's what lots of my friends had to do. So it wasn't something I kind of felt, well, this is sad. This was the norm to me, and this is the norm for many people. So it wasn't something painful for me. And I think at times I've had to bite my lip because I just know I've had to do it. And that's unfortunately what we have to do. There's been other opportunities I have been able to challenge, definitely throughout my career, and explain to people that, you know, for me, I just can't go anywhere around the world and immediately walk into anywhere, for example, a restaurant, and feel completely comfortable.
Yeah.
There's been restaurants I've walked into on my international business trips and I've had to walk straight out because I just do not feel comfortable. Or there's been places I've gone on holiday and I've just been really nervous because of how people are looking at my husband. And I've kind of sort of veered us off from an alleyway to walk a different pathway and he's not necessarily known it. So it is difficult. But I just feel that if you can't have those conversations in the workplace, you have to have those conversations somewhere. So you take it to your friends, you take it to your family. Otherwise, you'll just burst like a full ripe tomato. And I think you have to be able to express how you're feeling to somebody. And if you do have allies in the workplace, which I have had sometimes, then you share it with them.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting to kind of hear how you've had to internalize feelings before because of the outside perceptions and the stereotypes that can sometimes be associated with being a black woman in particular in this industry.
Sorry, Shani,
Ian,
something else. Can I just say something?
yeah,
Important? I think the other thing we have to be careful of, I think when I was younger, entering my career, I was in my role and I felt that I had to carry every single black person on my shoulder. So because I was the only black person in that company, I thought I had to behave professional all the time. I've got to be polite. I've got to do this. I've got to be exceptional. I've got to be excellent. I have to not try and make mistakes. I've got to be on time. And then after a while, I listened to this psychologist and said, listen, this is so unhealthy. You can't walk around carrying this load on your shoulders. You've got to try and be yourself in the workplace as much as you can. And I think for me, trying to be myself in my workplace has been the key that's enabled me to be more relaxed, because you can't carry the whole black race on your shoulders. It's just impossible because we're different kinds of people. We're not one holistic race.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And back when I was a graduate, I really felt that because I was one of very, very few, can count on less than one hand how many of us there were. And we had to set a good example for the rest of our race. We had to kind of set this standard that actually we're not the black people you see on the news every day committing crimes. We're not the black people you see every day on the news selling drugs. That the media portray this stereotype about the black community. And starting off in my career, I've exactly the same as you, made it my job to set a good example. But you're right, that's not something that you can do on your own. You have to have allies. You've got to all work towards the same goal, and you've also got to be open-minded about diversity. So one of these webinars we did last year was about allyship in the workplace, and it was all about educating our peers and educating people around us about what the BLM movement is about, what it is to be black and British, about black history, and why people were very angry at kind of the police brutality and stuff that was happening over in America, and some of the stereotypes that were set. So I think Ian touched on voices being heard and having the feeling of belonging, and I feel that in the role that I'm in at the moment, the team I'm working with they're all change managers. So they're all people-centric people, very human-centered. And I feel very lucky because I do feel like I belong. But there have been times where I've felt I've stuck out like a sore thumb, and I'm sitting in a room full of middle-aged white men in a water industry environment, and I'm the only black female and pretty young and junior in my career sitting in the same room. So I haven't felt like I've belonged. But I wonder how we can change that feeling and make people feel a bit more included. And as I said before, that starts with education, and it starts with looking at how we recruit people. But yeah, that's my thought.
Okay, I mean, I can respond to that. I mean, I do think one of the important things we need to do as human beings, that's all of us, is to encourage ourselves. I mean, I've walked into so many receptions in the UK and overseas, and I've been the only black person in the room. You know, it could be 300 people. I don't know anyone. I've just got my business card in my pocket.
Yeah.
But I've had to encourage myself and think, you know, you've got a right to be here. And then you just start talking to people, and they're lovely. Some people just look at me and walk away. Fine. I don't know why. I don't have to work out why. But other people just talk to me, and we have an engaging conversation. Because, you know, there are commonalities that we have between us.
Yeah.
You know, I lost my dad to cancer. Other people have lost people to cancer. You know, we can talk about these experiences. We can share things that we're going through. You know, my mum, elderly mother's in a nursing home now, which was very painful to go through. Other people are going through that. There's always commonalities, common ground, or race and beyond race. And I think those are the things that, you know, need to encourage us, because not everybody's the same. There are going to be people who are going to be welcoming, people who might be curious and say, oh, you know, what do you do and how did you get here? And then I just use it as a way, as you say, to share my story and just inform.
Yeah. So one last point of discussion before we move over to question and answers. So I'll hand over to Rose in a second. But one thing that Ian and Peter both touched on was training. And I've seen the exact same thing. Mandatory training modules have suddenly appeared about D&I in my learning platforms. And I know, Ian, you said that it's not just training modules, it's also what action is being taken, and I really I love to see it. It's great to hear that it's not all about talk, it's about action. And I know that Peter and Ian, you have turned your talk into action over the past year, and it's really great to see that. But I've seen a lot of other organizations in our industry that are implementing these training modules, and when people ask, is there anything I can do for D&I, what can I do to like build my knowledge, and what can I do to help my colleagues, and they're directed to a training module. But it's not, I personally don't see that as the answer. It's a really great start, and I'm really glad to see that Peter, Ian, they're like mandatory training modules now, which is really good. But how do we build on that, and what can we do to take that extra step further forward, Leela?
I mean, one of the things I'm really passionate about is I think that when we have BAME groups, you can't, I mean, I used to see them chaired by a black person and then predominantly black people in that group. That can't work. You have to have, if you can, 50% people from white backgrounds and other backgrounds in that group, because you have to have people understanding what it's like, some of the experiences. I mean, I've had loads, unfortunately, experiences of racism. So you have to be able to share those with people who understand and then can help make the change in the organization. You can't have a group of black and minority people meeting and then making recommendations. Those days are gone. To me, it's a bit like a burglary. So if you're burgled, you go to the person who's been burgled and say, so why were you burgled? And what do you think you could have done better to avoid that burglary? And then spend hours with that person analysing what they did and what they didn't do. It doesn't make sense because they're the victim of the crime. So in the same sense, you can't just focus on talking to black people about their experiences. all the time and having them share it. You have to have a mixture of people in the room who understand it, who are fully supportive, and who can help and are in positions of power to make that change. That's the only way that you can do it. Otherwise, people just get discouraged.
Yeah. Okay, I've overrun a little bit. I'm really sorry, everyone. Just got very into the conversation, the discussion. But I'm going to hand over to Rose now. I've had quite a few questions in the chat. So Rose, over to you.
Thank you very much, Shanice. And yeah, I think definitely worthwhile spending a bit more time on that and having the conversation and really going into some detail. Certainly really interesting from my perspective as well. So I just want to thank everyone who sent questions through. We've had absolutely loads. We don't have a huge amount of time to go through them, but I think let's just pick a couple and answer them in a bit more detail. So the first question I'm going to ask to each of the panelists is, what are the challenges you faced when implementing diversity and inclusion initiatives, and how have you overcome these? So I might start with Peter, if that's okay, just because you spoke first at the beginning.
That's sort of democratic, isn't it? What sort of way? It seems very fair, maybe is a better way of putting it. Thank you, Leela and Shanice. That was excellent, by the way. I was absolutely riveted to everything, that whole conversation. So I'm pleased you did spend time on it. I suppose it does come back to something Shanice was saying about the solution. I think is about awareness and education to a lot of this. The big challenges have been lots of people in our organisation not realising there was a problem and needing to be sort of convinced about, so why are we spending so much time on this? What's this all about, and what's the driver behind this? And needing to have conversations with people about, well, the why it's right by referencing back stories, much as you've been doing, and saying, well, how would you like to feel like this? To which most people will go, I wouldn't. And then there's the bit about, and just think about the customers we serve in this part of the world. And does it make sense that could we possibly deliver a great service if actually we're not representing this group that actually we're ultimately providing services to? So those sort of conversations are the sort of things that have really kind of started to shift the dial. So, but ultimately, I think it comes up to what Shanice was saying. It's about education and awareness as a platform, and it's a broad platform. It isn't about flipping on an online mandatory training module. It's a very, very broad perspective, much has been coming out in the discussion.
That's great, thank you. And same question to you, Ian.
Just building on what Peter says, I think that having awareness first, having something you can look at and say, well, this doesn't seem right, we can do differently, and then turning it into the opportunity space, of, well, this is what we must be able to do something about it. Oh, this is what I can do about it. My training enables me to do it. And then setting up the forums in such a way that actually you can just walk in and do it. And then it becomes part of the discourse of the organisation. I think the difficult, and you make sure that you praise people who do that. The difficult one for me, I'm sure the same, Peter, is the passive resistors. The ones that don't say a word. They do the training, they look at it and they go, yeah, right. And then they just toddle off. And I think the biggest challenge there is to try and build the room effectively so that they don't have any choice but to be in the room. And if you want to be a passive resistor in the room, then you're going to be blindingly obvious to almost everyone else there. So create that space where we called it a sandpits, my view of how we all have to go and we all have to play nice. We can have difficult discussions, we can have robust discussions, but you play nice. And making sure that you build the sandpits. Now, those can be actual meetings, they can be virtual meetings, they can be the training session itself, where you actually, rather than have people just do it without any discussion, you encourage the discussion. And then you can build that coalition of the willing, is how I would describe it. And once those people become popular, the people who don't want to play actually become quite unpopular quite quickly, and they get ignored. And that's probably the best place for them, to be honest, because then they'll know what it feels like to be Lila or Shanice, those who've not had the opportunity to be heard.
That's great, thank you, Ian. And finally, Lila, the same question for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're just taking people on a journey, and I think that's the thing. I think we just kind of have to recognise there isn't sort of I'm not sure there's going to be an end point. I think we just have to keep going, keep learning, keep talking, keep creating those safe spaces, keep doing. And then I think that, we'll get to a point where we will feel that actually we've made massive inroads. So that's what I would say, really.
That's great. Thank you. And I must say, there's some more questions in the chat, and I'm absolutely desperate to hear the answers to them, but I'm very, very conscious of time. So what I might suggest is Shanice and Abby and I take the questions offline and reach out to our panelists separately, and then we'll share the answers with the participant group. But I just on behalf of me, just a huge thank you again to Shanice, and I'll hand over to you to close the session.
Thank you so much, Rose. I'm so sorry for those people that ask questions that haven't been answered. We always run out of time in these talks. We put an extra half an hour on and we still run over. So yeah, as Rose said, we will get back to you with answers to the questions in a follow-up email. And hopefully we've opened up a new forum for discussion here with our panel. So I really, really hope that we can continue this conversation in the future. Thank you to the Institute of Water for hosting the event. Thank you to Abby for her organisation, and Rose also for your help with organising this event. Leela, Ian, Peter, huge thank you for attending. Really a great session. I've really enjoyed it. I wish you could stay on for longer. But yeah, thank you everyone, and we'll close the webinar.
Thank you. Great
Thank
session.
you. Bye.
Thanks all. Thanks very much.